Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN, and joining me on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. It's been an interesting few days already out there, and we know a lot of teams are looking at a lot of different positions. He is Emory Hunt of The Athletic. Emory, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you jumping on. So, before we get into any specific prospects, I want to touch first with you on Colin Murray made a little news on Friday, had some interesting comments, and one of the comments that stood out to me was the fact that, Murray is not going to work out at the Combine. He's not running a 40. He's not doing any throwing drills. He's saving everything for the pro day, and, we've seen mixed results with this. Teddy Bridgewater's pro day arguably hurt his draft stock, whereas Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, their pro days, people believed helped their draft stock. So what is your perspective on Colin Murray not performing on the field at the Combine?
I don't have much of a problem with it because at the end of the day, we all know this, that the Combine is essentially more important behind the scenes as opposed to what we want to see out there on the field. It's the interviews, the medical. As long as he's doing those things and doing it well and interviewing well, then teams don't really care if he's working out or not. You want him to work out just because you kind of want to see him go out there and do his thing. It's almost like a selfish thing, but for the most part, guys understand that, hey, this guy's going to put the ball in the air a couple more times, in pro days, private workouts and things of that nature. So why not wait there as opposed to throwing 40 to 50 passes here in Indy?
Another thing he said that I think his agent needs to have a conversation with him about this moving forward is that he got up there and said that, when people asked him about, hey, you saw how much money the baseball players are making in free agency, like Bryce Harper, does it make you, consider baseball? And he made the strange comment that, well, quarterbacks make that kind of money. And I think Murray doesn't understand that you're talking about $330 million guaranteed. Peyton Manning hasn't even made that much money in his entire lifetime so far when he was an NFL player. So I don't think Murray fully understands yet the economics of football.
Yeah, that's what you chalk it up to him being a young kid, but at least he was there honestly answering the questions, and that right there is awesome. So, he's able to stand there, take the quote unquote pressure from the media, and there was a lot of us standing in there firing questions off. And sometimes these guys get frustrated. You still have to remember they're 21, 22 years old.
Emory Hunt joined me on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at FBallGamePlan for all of your offseason NFL draft coverage leading you up to the NFL draft. Former running back you've been seeing the running backs. They got to do some of the drills, some of the running on Friday. What is your perspective on this year's crop of running backs? We know that Darrell Henderson, he had a great 40 time. He's a guy who's a dynamic running back. We know that Elijah Holyfield had a horrible 40 time. We'll see how that affects him in the draft. But what is your perspective on the crop of running backs at the Combine this year?
I think this is a good group of backs where if you need an RB2, this is the draft to get guys. Because there's, to me, not a lot of guys where you feel as though they can come in right now and be day one starters. Now, I do think it's a draft where guys can grow into the starting role. But there's the one guy I do like as a starter, in my opinion, because of his home run hitting ability. You just mentioned him, and Darrell Henderson. I think right there, man, when you're able to explode out of the gates and maintain your top speed like he does, that right there is a skill that not a lot of backs have, man. And if you do, it changes everything that you do defensively because you can't take bad angles. You have to be gap sound and remain gap disciplined. Otherwise, it's not going to turn into a 5-yard gain or a 10-yard gain. It's going to be legitimately a touchdown waiting to happen if you're in a bad defense or get caught in a bad spot.
I know organizations like the Philadelphia Eagles, the Miami Dolphins, and even maybe indirectly the Arizona Cardinals, they're keeping an eye on these running backs. Where do you think Darrell Henderson makes the most sense in the NFL, and do you have a player comp for him yet?
I liken his game to Delvin Cook. I think they run similarly. They have the same level of explosiveness and that same next gear that they can get to. If I'm looking at fits, I think Philly would be a phenomenal fit for Henderson and would be a fantastic pickup for the Eagles. Gives them an explosive element in their backfield. You also look at teams that utilize guys in spot duty roles. Baltimore would be another great fit if you want to compare him or pair him up with Lamar Jackson and watch that explosiveness. We talked about this during the draft last year, how I wanted the Browns to take Jackson and Barkley and have the most explosive backfield. And I think Baltimore could have that with a guy like Henderson. So I think those two spots, maybe even Kansas City, if you want to continue to add explosive speed to that offense, would be ideal fits for a guy like Henderson.
It's, obviously is going to be one of those, infamous moments of the weekend is how poorly Elijah Holyfield ran the 40-yard dash. And, I reckon it to the fact that everyone has a bad day. Everyone has a bad moment, even if you've been training and practicing for something. What is your perspective on him as an NFL prospect? I know from my perspective, I felt like physically he was ready for the NFL, but I wasn't sure if experience-wise he was ready for the NFL.
Yeah, I think I like his overall game. I think he's a solid NFL back. And what's interesting is that when you watch him run the 40, the first one you thought, okay, maybe he stumbled out the gates and he had a bad start. But then the double back and run the 4.8, you're like, wow. So it wouldn't surprise me to start hearing the talk of coming out of his camp that he was injured, trying to gut it through and run the 40, because it's hard to explain away a 4.7 plus and a 4.8 for a running back, especially a Power 5 running back. I think he'll test well at his pro day, and I think today was just one of those days where he just didn't get out the blocks, because when you watch him on tape, you're like, wow, he's got good footwork. He's able to hit the corner. He got good acceleration, and he just today just didn't justify what you saw on film. So that's why, again, you got to be careful of putting so much emphasis on what we just saw today, good or bad.
I had this conversation with someone this week, and I'd love to get your perspective on this. I feel like the combine for some teams, not every team obviously, but for some teams it actually hurts their ability to evaluate properly. Because to me, look at a guy like Drew Brees. Drew Brees was a guy who is going to the Hall of Fame, but he came out of college, almost nobody gave him that much attention, even though he was playing on a team with almost barely any legitimate talent and a Big 12 at a Big 10 school compared to other schools around the country. And yet people said, oh, he's too short. His hands are big enough. Everyone had a reason why this guy isn't that great. And yet, who was the number one pick overall? It was Michael Vick. Well, who had the better career? Obviously, it was Drew Brees. I feel like the combine actually hurts some teams because they depend maybe too much on the measurables and not enough on what the guy can actually do as a football player.
Yeah, and that's why you can't really allow those things to happen, man. At the end of the day, your eyes don't lie to you. And if something looks spectacular on film, it's spectacular. If it looks average, it's average. And you have to be comfortable with that. You can't create something that's not there. I know a lot of folks want to look at what happens in the combine and try to piece together football players based off the broad jump, the 40 time, everything else, and ignore everything they've done over the course of 3 years on a football field. And that's what teams swing and miss with the draft. You just got to be true to what the task at hand is finding football players. Athletic testing is important. It helps. It could help you separate guys that may be tied together right there in your evaluation, but you don't want to let that supersede what you watched out there on film.
Two of the wide receivers people are keeping an eye on at the combine this week were guys like Nikhil of Arizona State. Also, you had DK Metcalf, two guys who are just physical monsters. But how do you think they translate to the NFL? We know the NFL is becoming much more of a spread game. So two big physical receivers, how do you think those two guys, their games translate? And do you think that maybe in some ways their size could be a negative for them in a spread out NFL?
Not really, man. I like how they are built and how they run it. For me, Nikhil was my number one flanker. So I like him off the line of scrimmage a bit and on the move, in a sense. And DK Metcalf was my number two split in, so my X receiver. I like him as like a traditional guy at the top of the formation, one-on-one, going deep down the field, using his size to get all bump press and things of that nature. I think both guys have a role at the next level. I like also their ability, if an offense wants to, put them inside as bigger slot receivers, because both guys work well over the middle of the field. Both guys have that physicality to where they're not going to be afraid of contact flying their way. So they have some versatility within their game that makes them attractive prospects moving forward.
Finally, before I let you go, and Emory, I appreciate your time here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, Emory Hunt joining us live from the NFL Draft Combine in Indianapolis. Is there a player, doesn't matter what side of the ball it's on, that you think is going to benefit the most from the Combine this weekend that's really going to help their draft stock?
Will Greer out of West Virginia. I think once teams get him in the interview room and get him on a whiteboard and allow him to show him what he has learned over the course of his career. He was excellent at Florida, quite honestly, if we're being completely honest. We know that quarterback situation was terrible that year, and they put him in there, and they did great things. And to go from that to West Virginia and be prolific, I think once teams interview him and see how mature he is and how football smart he is, then go back and look at his film even more. They're going to be looking at his film with a different lens, and I think that's going to elevate his stock even more. So I think he's probably going to be the one that's going to creep into the first round when all is said and done.
Follow him on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. Emory Hunt. He covers the NFL, covers college football, and he has been joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Emory, appreciate your time.
Anytime, man.